We want the United States and the international community actively at the table. We want this conflict to end.
זהו ג'רמי בן עמי, נשיא ג'יי-סטריט, שנואם בוועידה הארצית הראשונה של הארגון. ג'יי-סטריט טוען כי הוא השדולה הפרו-ישראלית החדשה של אמריקה.
Pro-Israel, pro-peace.
Pro-Israel, pro-peace.
Pro-peace, pro-Israel.
Our mantra as a pro-peace, pro-Israel community.
There is something very captivating about the label pro-peace. Everybody wants to be pro-peace. But what does it mean?
The majority of the people on all sides actually share a common view of how to end this conflict. They share a belief in two states for two peoples. They share a desire for a peaceful world for their kids and their grandchildren. They want to figure out how to compromise in order to live together in peace and security.
One of the most seductive messages to the Jewish people for the last 2 centuries, certainly, has been the message of peace.
המסר האידיאליסטי של ג'יי-סטריט שווה את ליבם של יהודים רבים, צעירים ומבוגרים, שמתוסכלים מהסכסוך במזרח התיכון ובאמת רוצים שלום בין הערבים ליהודים.
J-Street is a phenomenon that is real and that the Jewish community needs to address. We should engage with them. We should talk to them. We should debate them.
The forces arrayed against the Jewish world today, the forces arrayed against the small country of Israel today, are so enormous.
ישראל מוקפת ב-22 מדינות ערביות בעלות אוכלוסייה של יותר מ-400 מיליון ובעלות משטרים אלימים אשר ברוב המקרים עוינים את המדינה היהודית. נראה כי מנהיגי ג'יי-סטריט מודעים לסביבה הקשה שבה צריכה להתקיים ישראל.
Sinai is devolving into a no-man's land, where terrorists are gaining the upper hand. Gaza is under the control of Hamas, which regularly fires rockets at Israeli civilians and whose leaders are calling openly for Israel's destruction. In Jordan, our good friend, the king, is facing growing rumbles of unrest. In Syria, the civil war has yet to come to a decisive end, but the country stands a reasonable chance of disintegrating and emerging as a stronghold for Al-Qaeda terror. And finally, in Lebanon, decades of civil war and instability have allowed Hezbollah to establish itself as the strongest military and political force in the country, with tens of thousands of rockets aimed directly at Israel.
الموت لإسرائيل.
האיום משכנותיה של ישראל נעשה מורכב אף יותר בגלל האיום הגרעיני האיראני. אף שבן עמי מודע לסכנות באזור, ג'יי-סטריט ממשיך להציג את הסכסוך באופן פשטני כסכסוך על קרקעות וגבולות. דעה זו מתעלמת מהיסטוריה מורכבת של 100 שנות אלימות בין ערבים ליהודים, שנבעה בעיקר מהבדלים אתניים ודתיים שהם מעבר לסכסוך קרקעות.
If we will push our leaders to go into the negotiation room and reach a two-state solution agreement based on the 67 borders, we will save the future of Israel. We will ensure the future of the Jewish people.
Israel's long-term security depends on fulfilling the aspirations of the Palestinian people through a two-state solution. Almost everyone in this room, if I gave you 60 seconds, you could write down the outline of the two-state solution.
I believe the two-state solution is important for Israel, and I believe that it's important for peace. I think most Israelis today think that any ending of any occupation has to be part of an overall peace process rather than unilateral.
We believe that the Palestinians, too, must have a national home of their own, living side by side with Israel. This is in Israel's interests, in America's interests. It is right and it is just.
In Israel that has to come to terms with its neighbors, make peace with its neighbors, end the occupation, end the settlements.
One of the things that I think J-Street has done is that it has advocated a complete exit from the West Bank without alerting anybody to what the real dangers are.
תוצאות הנסיגה מעזה בשנת 2005 הבהירו מה ככל הנראה יקרה אם הפלסטינים יקבלו מדינה גם בגדה המערבית.
From a historical point of view, the moment Israel withdrew from the Strip entirely, the rocket fire didn't abate, it expanded. The Palestinians didn't take the greenhouses they had been so generously left by the Israeli settlers, they trashed them. The Gaza Strip did not become a showcase for Palestinian moderates to prove what they might do with a state, turn Gaza into a little Hong Kong or Singapore or Dubai even on the Mediterranean. They turned it into a giant terrorist entrepot.
מבט מקרוב על מפת פתרון שתי המדינות של ג'יי-סטריט חושף את פגיעותה של ישראל אם מדינה פלסטינית בגדה המערבית תהיה דומה לזו שבעזה. חזרה לגבולות 1967 תצר את רוחבה המינימלי של ישראל ל-15 קילומטרים בלבד, ויהיה קשה מאוד להגן עליהם מפני מדינה פלסטינית עוינת. מרכזי האוכלוסייה של ישראל יהיו חשופים להתקפות טילים מהגדה המערבית, בדיוק כפי שכיום יישובים רבים חשופים להתקפות מעזה. מסוכן אף יותר הוא האופן שבו חושפת המפה של ג'יי-סטריט את ישראל בפני התקפות ממדינות ערב ממזרח. ויתור על השליטה בבקעת הירדן ייצור גשר יבשתי מבגדד עד ירושלים ותל אביב. צבאות עיראק, סוריה ואפילו איראן יוכלו לצעוד מירדן דרך הגדה המערבית הישר למרכזי האוכלוסייה הגדולים של ישראל.
This is not a peace map. This is a map that will incite the Arab world to see Israel's total vulnerability.
You're fundamentally willing to put Israel's basic security on the table in a way that no sane country would ever do for itself.
إسرائيل إذا خلعت المستوطنات 650 ألف مستوطن. إسرائيل إذا زاحت الجدار إيش إسرائيل بيكون؟ إسرائيل بتنتهي.
I'm not against a two-state solution. If the other state on the side of the Green Line or whatever is Canada, the Palestinians want a state, they want to conduct themselves as Canada would. You can visit, you can go, there's no problem. But I don't think Israel should sit still for a second and be a party to the midwifing of a 23rd Arab state that is just going to be another Iran hard on its borders.
ג'יי-סטריט סומכים על המנהיגים הפלסטינים שמנהלים משא ומתן בתום לב להשגת הסכם שלום מחייב לטווח ארוך המקובל על שני הצדדים.
The current leadership of the Palestinian Authority and of the PLO are actually the most amenable group of leaders that Israel has had to achieve this solution.
יש לכם פרטנר רציני, יש הנהגה פלסטינאית מתחייבת ומאמינה בפתרון של שתי מדינות. لا عودة للمفاوضات بدون مرجعية واللي هي قرارات الشرعية الدولية.
وسمعتوا من الإسرائيلية رفض.
معلش احنا دير بالك حتى الآن ما عندناش نووي، بس وحياة ربك لو عندنا نووي من الصبح خلينا نستخدمه.
Jewish politics is based on looking for accommodation. You don't want that aggression against you. You don't need that aggression against you. So you're ready to do almost anything in order to stop that aggression against you.
There's a leader in Ramallah who believes in a two-state solution and who recognizes the state of Israel. If you make a deal with the Palestinian Authority, you make a deal with Mahmoud Abbas, so that's a risk. Does that justify doing nothing? Is there no risk in doing nothing?
Being pro-peace doesn't mean being pro-national suicide for the state of Israel.
So yes, if there is a Palestinian partner, then obviously Israel has tried again and again and again. But today there is no Palestinian leadership like that.
Don't tell me that there is no partner. There is a partner. Abu Mazen, he wants peace with Israel and he accepts the existence of Israel as Israel declares itself to be.
الدولة اليهودية.
الدولة اليهودية. ايش دولة اليهودية؟ احنا بنقول دولة اسرائيل. سموا حالكم انتوا اللي بدكم اياه. انا بقبلش. وهي بحكي على الهواء هلا مش
الدولتين شعبين بمعنى انه في شعب يهودي هناك وشعب فلسطيني هون، نحن لن نقبل ذلك.
There's an infantilization of the Palestinians where it almost doesn't matter what they say or what they do. And it doesn't matter if they're caught on TV over and over again saying that they'll never live in peace with Israel, that they'll never acknowledge Israel's right to exist, that they'll never acknowledge the legitimacy of a Jewish state, that they'll never stop attacking, trafficking in the worst kind of anti-Semitism, teaching their children in schools to hate Jews. They'll say, okay, fine, yeah, that happened. But it has no significance to them because it's really all about us, and it's about the fact that we're wrong.
ג'יי-סטריט נמנעים מלעסוק בהחלטות הקשות שאיתה נאלצת ישראל להתמודד במאבקה לשרוד כמדינה יהודית.
Israel can't afford to lose any wars. It's got to win them all because it loses one and it's over.
If you are Benjamin Netanyahu right now, you are faced with a choice of sending young conscripts into battle, some of whom will die, in order to make sure that civilians living in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and the towns around the Gaza Strip should not come into harm's way. That is a choice of evils.
תיאוריית השלום של ג'יי-סטריט מבוססת על ההנחות הבאות. החברה הפלסטינית ומנהיגיה רוצים שלום עם המדינה היהודית. הפלסטינים לא יתקפו את ישראל משטחי הגדה המערבית כפי שהם עושים מרצועת עזה. חזרה לגבולות 1967 היא סיכון שניתן ליטול למרות חוסר השקט באזור.
Jeremy Ben-Ami and Daniel Levy are both guys who moved to Israel in the 1990s. In the heyday of the peace process and at a moment in Israel when the left really came to power and came into its own. The J-Street set of ideas were ideas that were conceived of and popularized on the left in Israel in the 80s and 90s during the era of the peace movement and the rise of labor and merits. And these ideas were then rejected in Israel. And what happened is that people then carted them off to America.
J-Street's not a new phenomenon, meaning it's old wine in a new bottle.
ג'יי-סטריט הוקם בשנת 2008 כשדולה פוליטית המבקשת להשפיע מוושינגטון על מדיניות ישראל. המייסד והנשיא של ג'יי-סטריט, ג'רמי בן-עמי, עבד במשך שנים עם ארגוני שמאל יהודיים כמו יוזמת ז'נבה. לבן-עמי גם ניסיון עשיר באסטרטגיה ותעמולה פוליטיות, כולל כישורים מרשימים ביחסי ציבור, שיווק ופרסום.
Jeremy Ben-Ami is a complex fellow. He formed a PR firm called Ben-Or Communications, which is today a very large PR company.
אחד הלקוחות של בן-אור הוא ג'ימי קרטר, שהאשים את ישראל במדיניות אפרטהייד. ג'רמי בן-עמי היה סמנכ"ל בכיר בפנטון תקשורת, חברת יחסי ציבור שתומכת בארגונים אנטי-ישראלים. עם הקמת ג'יי-סטריט, מיהר בן-עמי להפגין את מומחיותו ביחסי ציבור.
When J-Street launched, they received adulatory flood-the-zone media coverage.
They need a two-state solution. Everybody knows the broad outlines. We did not come before this committee to apologize.
They were on the cover of the Sunday New York Times magazine. They had every major newspaper write about them.
זו שרה בנינגה, אחת ממנהיגות הארגון סולידריות שייח ג'ראח, שמעודד עימותים עם צה"ל ופועל לפינוי יהודים ממזרח ירושלים. הארגון של בנינגה תמך בחרם, בהימנעות מהשקעות ובסנקציות נגד ישראל. היא זכתה לכבוד מיוחד בכנס הארצי של ג'יי-סטריט בשנת 2011.
I think it was great that J-Street encouraged the administration not to veto the UN resolution condemning Israel on the settlements.
And to put the pressure on Israel, we have joined what's called the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Movement.
Boycott the occupation products today.
Not one nickel, not one dime. We will pay for Israel's crime.
So you get this ferocious impatience with Israel, which makes it easier to align with people who really hate Israel, like the BDS movement. There's people who are trying to bring in some of the nastiest anti-Israel voices around.
There is an oppressor and there is an oppressed. Israel is the oppressor and the Gazans are the oppressed. Something is going to need to be done to force Israel's hand one way or the other.
Do you think Hamas is a terrorist organization?
Not any more than IDF is.
I do support the boycott of Israeli settlements and settlement products.
באוקטובר 2013 קראה קטלין פרטיס, לשעבר חברת דירקטוריון בג'יי-סטריט, להשתמש בחרם ככלי ללחוץ על ישראל לסיים את הכיבוש.
We invited to our conference a BDS activist to defend the BDS movement, the head of Jewish Voice for Peace. I'm very proud that she was at our conference.
הליגה נגד השמצה רואה בקול היהודי למען השלום ארגון אנטי-ציוני מוביל שקורא להימנעות מהשקעות, לחרם ולסנקציות על ישראל, ומנצל את יהדותו כדי לחזק את אמינותם של כוחות אנטי-ישראלים. בבחירות לקונגרס האמריקאי בשנת 2012 תמך ג'יי-סטריט במספר חברי קונגרס אשר לטענת ג'יי-סטריט הם פרו-ישראלים. אחד מהם הוא חבר הקונגרס הדמוקרטי ממישיגן, ג'ון דינגל, שהיה אחד משני חברי קונגרס בלבד שהצביעו נגד חוק שיתוף הפעולה הביטחוני בין ישראל לארצות הברית בשנת 2012, חוק שעבר ברוב של 411 קולות מול 2.
You've got a small cadre of members of Congress who are very skeptical of Israel's motives. These are the kind of people who are supportive of J-Street's agenda.
They're trying to erode that essentially wall-to-wall support that Israel enjoys among the American people and reflectively among American decision makers and among American politicians in Washington.
בשנת 2013 תמך ארגון ג'יי-סטריט במינויו של הסנאטור צ'אק הייגל למזכיר ההגנה. הייגל הוא מבקר נוקב של ישראל.
And this is not about terrorists don't like freedom. Tell that to the Palestinian people who have been chained down for many, many years.
הייגל גם השמיע הערות שיש שיגדירו כאנטישמיות.
We work with the American Task Force for Palestine, the Muslim Public Affairs Committee, a whole range of groups that are Arab, Palestinian, and Muslim that all support peace.
Israel is not a democracy. Israel is a theocracy and is an apartheid state against every fiber of the modern world.
And want nothing more for their people than I want for my people, which is a secure future for their children and grandchildren.
What J-Street does is they say, oh, no, we're not for BDS. We're not for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. But what we are willing to do, we're going to provide cover for these organizations who are inherently opposed to Israel's existence.
There's an important thing to notice about J-Street's agenda and about the way that people like Jeremy Ben-Ami and Daniel Levy talk about these ideas. There's always a second part. The second part is we must have American engagement, as they say. What they mean is American pressure.
ישראל, המדינה הלא מוסלמית היחידה במזרח התיכון, נתונה להתקפות בלתי פוסקות ולמצור מאז הקמתה ב-1948. למרות מלחמות, פיגועי טרור והחרמות, ישראל ממשיכה לשגשג, וללא ספק צריכה ורוצה שלום. האתגר הוא כיצד להגיע לשלום. ארגון ג'יי-סטריט נוסד כדי להשפיע על המדיניות האמריקאית ללחוץ על ישראל להסכים למדינה פלסטינית.
We will lead toward a two-state solution because we care deeply about Israel's future and sympathize with the right of the Palestinian people to freedom and dignity. It is up to us to build the political power that sets our leaders free to do what is right and in the best interests of Israel and the United States. We do support the president's vision for two states based on the 67 lines with swaps, and it is going to be through the political change that we create the ability for a president like Barack Obama to stand strong and do the right thing. But we do think that the president could be pushing harder, and that's part of our call to action.
Comes J-Street and says, you know, we can't convince the Israeli electorate, but we can circumvent the Israeli electorate by going to the United States and trying to get people in the United States to pressure Israel, for its own good.
عندما يقال فرض الحل نعلم من وراء ذلك أنه سيكون منقوصا.
فبالتالي لا اطمئن، احنا للمرة الأولى نجد نفسنا موحدين، حتى رولات التطرف عند حماس بدها أو الأطراف اللي بتقاتل بدها كمان دولة في حدود 67. ثم بعد ذلك لنا ما نقوله، لأنه الفكرة الملهمة لا يمكن تحقيقها بالدفعة واحدة. كل بيعرف إنه لا يمكن تحقيق الفكرة الملهمة أو الهدف الكبير دفعة واحدة.
We need the President of the United States, we need the Congress to step forward, to engage with the quartet, to lay out some parameters, to say to the parties, you must come to the table.
They are unlike most other Jewish organizations in the sense that they're perfectly happy to impose their positions, their ideas, they think should supersede the decision-making of the Israeli government and the mainstream Jewish community.
None of us know what's going to bring peace. None of us know what's going to get the Palestinian side to make accommodations. The minute you're absolutely certain that you have a monopoly on wisdom, I think you stop listening.
There's an arrogance involved in an organization in America comprised of Americans who do not live there, whose children are not in the army, whose family members are not the ones in restaurants who could be killed by suicide bombers or riding in buses, giving instructions to Israel on what are truly life and death matters.
That's the staggering thing, the arrogance of J-Streeters thinking that they know that a withdrawal to the 67 borders will bring peace.
I have no idea on the basis of what that they feel this kind of confidence, but they do.
They're peace-loving, but they have a certainty that they know what's going to bring peace here. Why do you know better than us? We don't care about peace? You're more moral than we are? You're more intelligent than we are?
You know, a lot of people try to circumvent the democratic process in Israel, and it's not good when anybody does it. I mean, J-Street is being empowered by an administration that clearly wants to empower it.
So there's something that's a little bit imperialistic, taking this approach to Israel of essentially saying we know our ideas won't sell there, so we're going to sell them in Washington and get them imposed on them by the Obama administration.
The resistance to that pressure on the part of Israelis is a resistance to literally genocidal threats. I think it's very hard for Americans to really understand what kind of pressure Israel's under.
כדי להפעיל לחץ על ישראל, נוקט ג'יי-סטריט אסטרטגיית יחסי ציבור ושיווק שכוללת מספר מרכיבי מפתח. הגדרה מחדש של המושג פרו-ישראל. האשמת ישראל בכך שאין שלום. החלשת התמיכה מצד הקהילה היהודית בישראל. עיוות המשמעות של ערכים יהודיים.
So you had some PR guys who realized that this was the great problem they were facing, was that people would view their ideas as being anti-Israel and anti-peace. So what better way to deal with that problem than to simply label yourself pro-Israel and pro-peace?
One of the fundamental problems that we're trying to change with J-Street is the notion that the only way to, quote-unquote, be pro-Israel is to simply love everything that the government of Israel does. Rather than defining pro-Israel to mean unquestioning support for the government of Israel, we define it as active, urgent action to facilitate a two-state solution.
To support Israel today means to support Israel to get out of the occupied territories, because we can't go on like this. You know, how many more children need to die?
We are the future of pro-Israel,
because we can all imagine the world as it should be.
You rarely see J-Street praising Israel. What you read is almost always condemnation. You can't be pro-Israel and prioritize the condemnation over the praise, which is what J-Street almost always does.
When you say that you are pro-Israel, you actually support a strong and prosperous and safe Israel. So when you're an organization that says, we blame Israel for all of the pathologies of its neighbors, and we think that the only actor in all of this is the Jewish state, and the only responsible party here for any of this are the Jews, that is not really being pro-Israel.
Do not ask us to stand quietly by as the present Israeli government charts a course that erodes its Jewish character, undermines its democratic principles, and leads to international isolation. There is no viable peace process to speak of. The present Israeli leadership pays lip service to a two-state solution.
מתחת למסרים של ג'יי-סטריט התומכים בישראל, בשלום, בדמוקרטיה ובפלסטין, מסתתרת הנחה מרומזת כי ממשלת ישראל היא המחסום העיקרי להשגת שלום.
We are trying to help change the course of a country whose government is driving it off a cliff.
J-Street is, they're a classic illustration of this problem, of not willing to believe bad things about other people, only about yourself.
If this conflict is all about the stuff that we did wrong to them, it actually is very empowering because it means that we can solve it. We can then do these moves. We can undo the damage.
This liberal paradigm that we are all good people and that if we're only nice to other people, they'll be nice to us, is more than just an intellectual commitment. It's an emotional commitment. I don't want to believe that you are so malevolent that I have to fight you. And as a result, when you meet people who might be bad people, you can't afford to identify them. So once you no longer are willing to view incitement to murder Israelis and Jews as one of the reasons why there's no peace, then you end up, who can you blame? You can blame Israel.
The insidious thing about blaming it on Israel, blaming the absence of peace in the Middle East on Israel, is that it gives you this inflated sense of importance. Well, if it's all the Jews' fault, then I, as a Jew, can fix everything by being, out there on the street, demonstrating against Israel, demonstrating against the IDF, demonstrating for sanctions against Israel. I can do it. It's me. It's much more luxurious to believe that it's about me than to believe that it's about the other guy, because the other guy I can't do anything about.
If only we did more. If only we gave more. If only we accommodated more. All that hostility would go away.
What you have here is a one-sided blame game with the marketing that they do that just promotes Israel as the responsible party.
הנחת העבודה של ג'יי-סטריט היא שהסכסוך הערבי-ישראלי הוא תולדה של כיבוש השטחים הפלסטינים. אם יסתיים הכיבוש, יבוא הסכסוך אל קיצו.
Those younger than me, for them, the reality of today is of intifadas, of occupation, and Israel no longer as the David, but as the Goliath.
Young people today who want to bring peace to the Middle East first need to understand how the conflict got started. They need to understand why there is an occupation. Jewish statehood was designed to say, for once and for all, there's going to be a tiny little strip of land in the Middle East. It used to be called Judea, then it was called Palestine, now it's called Israel. But there's going to be one tiny strip of land. It won't be big. It has no natural resources. It's in a very complicated neighborhood.
יהודים חיו בארץ ישראל ברצף במשך אלפי שנים. מספרם גדל בעקבות הגירה מאירופה במאה ה-19 בתקופת השלטון העות'מאני ובתקופת המנדט הבריטי אחרי מלחמת העולם הראשונה. עם העלייה בפופולריות של הלאומנות הערבית והתעוררות האמונה באסלאם, ליבו המנהיגים הערבים את העוינות ואת הטינה כלפי המהגרים היהודים. אלימות קשה נגד היהודים פרצה בשנות ה-20 וה-30 של המאה ה-20, זמן רב לפני הקמתה של מדינת ישראל. מעשי האלימות כללו פעולות טרור וכמה פרעות. טבח ערבי אחד חיסל את כל האוכלוסייה היהודית בחברון, שחיה שם אלפי שנים ושבה רק אחרי 1967. רבים ממעשי הטבח ביהודים בפלסטינה דורבנו על ידי המנהיג הפלסטיני חאג' אמין אל-חוסייני, המופתי של ירושלים. המופתי היה בעל ברית קרוב של היטלר ותכנן יחד עם הנאצים להקים מחנות השמדה בפלסטינה. הכוחות הקולוניאליסטים הבריטים לא הגנו על יהודי פלסטינה, והיישוב היהודי החל להקים ארגוני הגנה כמו ההגנה. היו יהודים שהצטרפו לפלגים אחרים, שקראו לתגובה פעילה יותר למלחמה באלימות הערבית ולסיום השלטון הקולוניאליסטי הבריטי. הוצאו תוכניות חלוקה רבות למדינות נפרדות ליהודים ולערבים בפלסטינה, כולן נדחו על ידי המנהיגים הערבים. לבסוף, עם סיום המנדט הבריטי בפלסטינה ויציאת כל הכוחות הבריטים, הכריזה מדינת ישראל על עצמאותה ב-14 במאי 1948. למחרת הכרזת העצמאות, הכריזו כל 7 החברות בליגה הערבית מלחמת חורמה על המדינה שזה עתה הוקמה. המלחמה הערבית נגד ישראל יצרה 2 סוגים של פליטים. יהודים תושבי פלסטינה עברו טיהור אתני, או נטבחו על ידי צבאות ירדן ומצרים באזורים שכבשו במלחמת 1948, כולל הגדה המערבית, עזה והעיר העתיקה בירושלים. מאות אלפי ערבים פלסטינים ברחו מאזורי הקרבות, או אולצו לעזוב אזורים שכבש הצבא הישראלי שרק הוקם. מספר דומה של יהודים ברחו, או אולצו לעזוב את המדינות הערביות השכנות.
People need to understand what happened to Jews in virtually every Arab country in which Arabs were a majority. Obviously, look at Egypt, look at Iraq, look at Lebanon. All of these countries and others that I have not mentioned basically got rid of 95-98% of their Jewish populations between 1947 and 1949.
רוב הפליטים היהודים האלה השתקעו בהצלחה בישראל ובצרפת. מדינות ערב שכנו את הפליטים הפלסטינים במחנות פליטים, ונאסר עליהם, כמו גם על ילדיהם ונכדיהם, להתיישב מחוץ למחנות.
It is the Arab world that insisted on keeping the Palestinians homeless, that made sure that they would not resettle in other countries. It was a very calculated, very cruel policy, which continues to the very present day.
מלחמת הערבים נגד ישראל נמשכה גם לאחר עצמאותה. בתחילת יוני 1967 גבר המתח במזרח התיכון. נשיא מצרים עבד אל-נאצר קרא לכל מדינות ערב להשמיד את ישראל ולזרוק את היהודים לים. צבאות ערב החלו להיערך על גבולותיה של ישראל כדי לתקוף בו זמנית ממצרים, סוריה וירדן. ישראל יצאה למתקפת מנע וניצחה במלחמה נגד הכוחות המשולבים של 3 צבאות ערביים ב6 ימים בלבד. בעקבות המלחמה השתלטה ישראל על הגדה המערבית ועל רצועת עזה, שעד אז היו בשליטת צבאות ירדן ומצרים. ישראל הציעה להחזיר את השטחים שעליהם השתלטה תמורת שלום. העולם הערבי הגיב בסירוב מהדהד.
There is no such thing as an Arab-Israel conflict. There is an Arab war against Israel. There is an Arab war against the Jewish people's right to a state. It is the conflict of countries, over 20 countries, with an enormity of land, with more land than they know what to do with, that refuse to allow one people its land.
לאחר שמדינות ערב לא הצליחו להשמיד את המדינה היהודית בדרך צבאית, הן עברו למלחמה אידיאולוגית. הן הגדירו את הסכסוך במונחים מרקסיסטיים כמאבק שחרור משלטון קולוניאלי. בנוסף, הן קידמו זהות פלסטינית הנבדלת מהזהות הערבית באמצעות הקמת הארגון לשחרור פלסטין, אש"ף. על פי נרטיב זה, שאומץ על ידי רבים בתקשורת ובאוניברסיטאות, הסכסוך קיים בגלל מה שנקרא הכיבוש. עם סיום הכיבוש, הסתיים גם הסכסוך.
Since that so-called occupation was the consequence of the war against Israel, it cannot retroactively have become its cause. So anyone who claims that the occupation of those territories is the reason for Arab aggression against Israel is simply inverting historical reality.
בעקבות ביקורו ההיסטורי של נשיא מצרים אנואר סאדאת בישראל, נחתם הסכם קמפ דיוויד, אשר סלל את הדרך לחתימת הסכמי אוסלו בין מנהיגי ישראל והפלסטינים בשנות ה-90. מטרת הסכמי אוסלו הייתה לסיים את הסכסוך באמצעות פתרון של שתי מדינות, אולם לאחר אוסלו, המנהיגים הפלסטינים דחו מספר הסכמי קבע ופתחו בגל של טרור נגד ישראל, תוך הפרה ברורה של הסכמי אוסלו.
The Oslo Accords were based on the assumption in Israel and in the West that Yasser Arafat and the PLO are reliable partners, that if you dump them in the West Bank and in Gaza and you start pouring guns on them and billions of dollars, you will get peace. Now, what did this bring us? It brought us Hamas, it brought us rockets, it brought us corruption, it brought us bad government.
The Second Intifada proved to Israelis once and for all that their belief in the idea of land for peace had basically been a pipe dream. They had been sold a bill of goods. They had been sold it to a certain extent by the Israeli left. They had been warned by the Israeli right that it wasn't realistic.
قاتلوهم أينما كنتم حيثما ثقفتموهم فاقتلوهم.
What J-Street offers to a lot of people is an explanation for why that all failed. They say the reason that it failed was because America didn't pressure the parties enough, and America didn't play an active enough role.
כדי ליצור סביבה פוליטית לשינוי במדיניות האמריקאית, ג'יי-סטריט פועל להחלשת התמיכה בישראל בקרב יהודי אמריקה.
People are pretty pissed off that their voice has been stolen. And that there is not a place for them in the organized Jewish communities. We see our communal institutions and our leaders regularly held hostage by a few large funders or a few loud voices who urge them to stay silent and shut the door to debate. There is an atmosphere of fear and intimidation. There are rabbis who worry about the renewal of their contracts. What a statement that we are joined by nearly 100 rabbis who are part of our 600 rabbis that are part of J-Street's rabbinic cabinet. I think we're taking on much more than AIPAC. I mean, I think that it is the Conference of Presidents, it's the American Jewish Committee, it's the lobbying structures of the federations, it's the network of JCRCs, the Community Relations Councils. It's a really multi-layered and multi-headed hydra. This monopoly, this many-headed monopoly in a sense, has been to try to squash us.
בעוד שג'יי-סטריט חיפש אוזניים קשובות בקהילה היהודית, נראה כי הוא ניסה להשתיק קולות של בעלי דעות מנוגדות. בשנת 2010 פנה ג'יי-סטריט למס ההכנסה האמריקאי וביקש לשקול מחדש את הפטור ממיסים שניתן לארגונים יהודיים אחרים שעשו פעולות צדקה בישראל ובגדה המערבית.
J-Street essentially is dividing the Jewish community, and it's making pro-Israel activity harder. J-Street blocks and tries to block strong pro-Israel advocacy in synagogues and in the JCRCs and in the federations.
J-Street has a powerful PR machine. They are pushing out very critical messages about Israel. They do it on college campuses, and they do it in communities.
ג'יי-סטריט מקדיש מאמצים רבים כדי להשפיע על סטודנטים יהודים שלומדים במכללות.
They call themselves a pro-peace organization. Now that's something that's very appealing. It's very seductive. It's something that college students would love to be a part of.
It allows them to be activists without having to really deal with the difficult issues, the root issues.
Believing that every problem has a solution. Believing that if you're only nice to the other person, he'll be nice to you. I mean, that's taking interpersonal behaviors to the international, very messy and conflict-ridden world.
Knowledge doesn't matter at all. It just matters to say a sweet tagline and to not, be offending anybody. That's the biggest problem on campus, being offensive.
Today, the younger generation is embarrassed about supporting Israel. So a lot of Jewish college students and others are looking for ways of being able to say, well, we kind of support Israel, but we really support peace and humanitarian values, and if that means that we have to condemn Israel singularly and uniquely, we'll do it. It's a way of becoming acceptable.
כשג'יי-סטריט U הושק בכמה מהקמפוסים, הוריד הארגון את התמיכה בישראל מהסיסמה שלו. פעילה של ג'יי-סטריט בקמפוס כתבה, איננו רוצים לבודד אנשים שלא מרגישים בנוח עם התמיכה בישראל, אז אנחנו אומרים שאנחנו בעד השלום.
J-Street and J-Street U insist on being considered part of the big tent of Jewish organizations that care about Israel. J-Street ends up subverting the idea of consensus and using the idea of the democratic process in Jewish big tent efforts to accomplish their own goals. They insist that these events are invalid without inclusion in these conversations by advocates of boycotts and divestments and sanctions, inclusion in these conversations by advocates of Israel Apartheid Week.
They're speaking to students and only criticizing Israel. It's as if they're giving the Palestinians a free pass.
They introduce the idea of co-sponsoring with groups that have been traditionally anti-Israel.
באוניברסיטת פרינסטון נתן ג'יי-סטריט חסות לדיון בשבחי תנועת החרם, ההימנעות מההשקעות והסנקציות, בשיתוף עם הקול היהודי למען השלום. באוניברסיטת מרילנד ובאוניברסיטת קליפורניה, ג'יי-סטריט נתן חסות לאירוע יחד עם סטודנטים למען צדק בפלסטין, ארגון שהליגה נגד השמצה הגדירה כאחד מ10 הארגונים האנטי-ישראלים המובילים בארצות הברית. האירוע נערך לכבוד תנועת סולידריות שייח ג'רח. הכנס השנתי של ג'יי-סטריט בשנת 2013 כלל פאנל שעסק בדרכים לפעול נגד תוכנית תגלית שמחזקת את הזהות היהודית ואת ההזדהות עם ישראל. הרבה דניאל שו, מנהלת הלל באוניברסיטת אוהיו, קראה לתגלית לעודד סולידריות עם העם הפלסטיני ולתת יותר דגש לנרטיב הפלסטיני. מנכ"ל הלל, אריק פינגרהט, הוכיח אותה על דבריה במכתב פתוח לכל הנהלת הלל. המאמץ להחליש את הזהות היהודית ולהפוך את הצעירים היהודים לאוניברסליים בא לידי ביטוי גם בתמיכה של ג'יי-סטריט בעלייה של סטודנטים אמריקאים לקברו של יאסר ערפאת ברמאללה כדי לחלוק לו כבוד.
You deny yourself totally, you completely identify with the people who hate you or people who consider you their enemy, and that will somehow transform them.
באוניברסיטת ברקלי בקליפורניה החליטו סטודנטים יהודים להוציא את ג'יי-סטריט U מהאוהל הגדול של הארגונים היהודיים בקמפוס בגלל פעילותו האנטי-ישראלית.
Bravery is to be a Zionist on college campuses today. Bravery is to stand up for Israel on college campuses today.
It is up to us to return home from this conference with the charge to rouse our neighbors from indifference. It is up to us to inspire our community's leaders to live up to the values that they preach. We do believe that it is our role to repair the world, to seek peace and pursue it, and to be a light unto the nations.
It's part of the sort of tikkun olam worldview of this idea that what it is it's a confusion of politics and religion. It's this idea that Judaism is liberalism and liberalism is Judaism.
It's just some idea that they have of perfecting the world, making the world a sweeter place. And they know how to do it, presumably.
One of the dimensions of the problem is what a number of people have called moral narcissism, which is this, it's an overwhelming concern about personally being a moral person and really not caring about the consequences outside of one's own solipsistic concerns. The world is a messy place, but for moral narcissists, the key thing is I want to feel good about myself. I think that people in J-Street feel good about themselves, and I think that they draw people who want to feel good about themselves.
We raise our children to believe that they should not treat other people the way that we would not want to be treated ourselves. But as Peter Beinart has so eloquently challenged us, we make a real mistake when we tell those same children that they have to check their Jewish values at the door of Zionism.
The greatest Jewish value of all is pikuach nefesh, the saving of lives, and the protection of 6 million Jews who now make their home in the Jewish state, and anything that undercuts the ability of Israel to defend itself against nuclear attack, against terrorist attack, is inconsistent with Jewish values.
For younger American Jews who've grown up with Israel as a regional superpower, it's not enough to say we need Israel as a refuge, because they can't imagine needing Israel as a refuge. What they can imagine, I think, is being inspired and connected to an Israel that, under difficult circumstances, is living out the democratic ideals that they believe are the highest form of the Jewish ethical tradition.
That's the good Jew, the Jew who helps everyone else, the Jew who puts others before themselves, the Jew who cares more about strangers than they do about family.
Young Jews very often want to help others. And I think that this is a very healthy impulse. In general, we all want to help others.
The idea of tikkun olam as applied to the Arab-Israeli conflict really is, at the level at which it's being applied now, almost a mystical belief in some higher transformation that will occur if you self-abnegate, you deny yourself totally, you completely identify with the people who hate you or people who consider you their enemy, and that will somehow transform them.
If a Jewish student feels that repairing the world and that being a universalist and being progressive is equivalent to being Jewish, then they don't have to be proudly Jewish, and they don't have to be proudly Zionist.
But the real answer to wanting to help the world is to help stop that extraordinary animus against the Jewish people.
Young people have a tendency to assign their values and their worldview to people throughout the world.
There's also another piece which explains why this conflict is so painful to young Americans and to young people all over the world. We live in a distinctly post-identity world. We live in a world in which I think the real political philosopher is John Lennon. Imagine there's no countries, it isn't hard to do, nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. And I think on some deep level, young people imagine if we can just end countries, we'll bring peace.
They don't want to believe that other people have different worldviews than them, because their worldviews are all about pluralism. Almost this utopia where everybody is the same and where everybody has the same values, so there really isn't anything to have a conflict about.
It's inconceivable to me that this conflict can still be in the same place that it is now, 17 or 18 years from now. And so I have to believe that peace is possible. So J-Street has to be out there much more. It has to be much louder.
So you can find me on J-Street because I have a deep commitment to both countries that I consider my own,
and because I have a deep commitment to creating good things in the world.
Because they are so sensitive and because they are so good-hearted. All I have to do is to go out there and apply this good-heartedness in the world, and it will be improved. And wicked Israel is not as good-hearted as I am. The stupidity of this kind of innocence in a world which is so complicated, when you belong to a people with such a tortured history of trying to arrive at the good in the midst of being persecuted and prosecuted falsely over so many centuries, I mean, it is almost intolerable.
Everybody has a right to criticize any country in the world. The question is what standard you apply to that country. Americans have no right to apply a double standard to Israel, even if they're American Jews. Name any country in the history of the world faced with threats comparable to those faced by Israel that has had a better record of human rights, a better record of compliance with the rule of law, and a better compliance with the idealism of Jewish values. Nobody can name a single country that exceeds Israel. Does that mean Israel's perfect? Of course not. But all we ask is to subject the Jewish state to a single standard of comparative analysis. And that's what J-Street refuses to do.
You can be someone who simultaneously loves and supports Israel and voices concern about Israeli policies. I'm on J-Street because time is running out and we need to stop playing politics.
So Jewish idealists, especially the young ones, are looking for social status and moral purity, and Israel taints them. When they think Israel is behaving badly, they feel some collective guilt, and they need to get out from under the burden of that guilt. Even though they say they're for social justice, that's not it, because it doesn't matter to them that hundreds of thousands of, or tens of thousands of Arabs have killed Arabs in gruesome ways. It doesn't matter to them that Muslims hang homosexuals in the city square. It doesn't matter to them even that Arabs have black slaves in Sudan. This is all beside the point, because the point for them is not social justice, it's expiation.
Israel is a country that does stand up for the liberal values I cherish: women's rights, gay rights, freedom of speech, tolerance, religious pluralism. And I see them surrounded by a sea of countries that are hostile to those values.
As a liberal, you must support Israel. As a progressive, you must support Israel. You can be critical of its policies with regard to settlements, as I have been. You can be critical of some of its approaches to peace with the Palestinians, but you can't be a liberal and not support Israel's right to defend itself. Liberal values require that you look to see who are the best countries in the world when it comes to human rights and compliance with the rule of law, when you're faced with terrible threats of your own destruction. And Israel is at the very, very top of that list.
Acquiring sovereignty is not enough. There is another challenge, which is to invest that sovereignty with the best of Jewish ideals, as envisioned by the Hebrew prophets.
They talk about Jewish values. What they really mean is liberal values. This is sort of one of the last refuges of people who maybe don't have a great deal of confidence in their ideas, or don't really want to debate their ideas openly as political ideas, as strategic ideas, as national security ideas. It's easier to say, well, my heart's in the right place. These are my Jewish values.
J-Street's activity, supposedly as a pro-Israel organization, is somewhat of a puzzle, because some of the activity doesn't seem to be pro-Israel in its nature. Why they would oppose sanctions against Iran if they're pro-Israel is beyond me. Why they would refuse to support Israel's operation into Gaza after Israel was pummeled by rockets and missiles from Gaza for years. Again, a question I cannot answer. Why they would oppose a U.S. veto in the United Nations of a resolution that would attack Israel? Again, I don't understand why this organization calls itself pro-Israel. So I went looking at whatever public documents there were. And suddenly I understood why early on, about 2 or 3 years ago, J-Street was opposed to sanctions against Iran. Some of the names that showed up was a woman from New York named Genevieve Lynch. She's on the board of directors of the National Iranian American Council, which has been identified as a potential foreign agent for the government of Iran.
It's impossible to know what J-Street's position on Iran is. I actually offered to contribute money to J-Street if they would answer a series of specific questions about their positions on Iran, and I couldn't get an answer to any of those questions.
רישומי ועדת הבחירות הפדרלית של ארצות הברית מראים כי יש עשרות אמריקאים ערבים ומוסלמים, חלקם בעלי קשרים לארגונים אנטי-ישראלים, אשר תורמים לוועדת הפעולה הפוליטית של ג'יי-סטריט.
The IRS released, perhaps by accident, J-Street's tax forms, and there was $250,000 of donations from Mr. Soros.
ג'ורג' סורוס הוא מנהל השקעות מיליארדר אשר תומך ברעיונות ובארגונים פוליטיים של השמאל הקיצוני. הוא התבטא נגד ישראל ותורם סכומים גדולים לארגונים אנטי-ישראלים.
It turns out that George Soros was the main donor behind the organization, and Jeremy Benami lied about that for several years.
%50 of their budget came from outside the United States, a fact that they hid and lied about until it was made public some years later.
$800,000 from a woman in Hong Kong. I have no clue why this woman, a Philippine woman who lives in Hong Kong near the racetrack, was giving J-Street a third of their budget 2 years ago. Something is amiss here.
The big problem with J-Street is it doesn't tell the truth. It is deceptive. It hides its positions. It does it through studied ambiguity. And an organization that uses that kind of deception is guilty of falsity in advertising. J-Street pretends that it is pro-Israel and pro-peace. It is neither.
הגישה הביקורתית של ג'יי-סטריט כלפי ישראל וחוסר סבלנותו בנוגע להיעדר השלום באים לידי ביטוי בספק שמטיל דניאל לוי ממייסדי הארגון בחשיבות קיומו של בית לאומי ליהודים.
If we're all wrong and a collective Jewish presence in the Middle East can only survive by the sword, it cannot be accepted. It's not about what we do. Sound familiar? They hate us for what we are, not what we do. If that's true, then Israel really ain't a very good idea.
When you hide who you are on purpose and don't tell people what you're doing and they have to piece it together themselves, it's very confusing and it's very disconcerting.
Those who attack us as being anti-Israel, those who question whether or not what we are doing is in the best interest of the Jewish people are so fundamentally mistaken, because the work that we're doing is the ultimate act of Zionism.
People aren't used to having to deal with this kind of subversion. You have to be very bold and you have to be very educated and you have to be very willing to say, you know what, you're not telling me the truth.
הפעילות של ג'יי-סטריט מעלה תהיות קשות לגבי טענתו שהוא פועל למען ישראל, למען השלום ולמען הדמוקרטיה. ג'יי-סטריט מאשים את ישראל בלבד בכך שאין שלום, ומתעלם מהשנאה ומההסתה מצד הפלסטינים. ג'יי-סטריט רוצה שארצות הברית תלחץ על ישראל כדרך לעקוף את התהליך הדמוקרטי של ישראל. ג'יי-סטריט פועל להחלשת תמיכת הקהילה היהודית האמריקאית בישראל. ג'יי-סטריט הסכים לקבל תמיכה כספית ממקורות שעוינים את ישראל ואת העם היהודי.
I think that J-Street thrives on the ignorance of its members, the good feeling of its members. Everybody thinks J-Street stands for all these positive values, but they don't know the positions that J-Street actually takes on issues crucial to Israel's survival.
they align themselves on the Arab side in the lopsided Arab war against the Jews. Do they have a right to align themselves on the Arab side? Every right in the world. What they do not have a right to do is to pretend that they are on the Jewish side.
The conflict is unbearable to a younger generation. For many people, the idea that a problem doesn't have a resolution in the immediate future or even in the medium run is a completely unthinkable thing.
What Israel needs to do is be very sober and realistic, and above all, keep the interests of its own security uppermost in mind. That should be the basis of all policymaking. Not because you feel good about a policy, not because you're taking risks for peace, not because you're appeasing the editorial page of the New York Times, but because your only interest is making sure that 100 years from now, my grandchildren will be able to live and be citizens of a Jewish state still thriving.
It takes a certain kind of inner strength to say, I can live with the lack of the fulfillment of my dream as long as it takes, as painful as it is, as high as the price ever gets, because this dream is only part of a larger dream, which is Jewish sovereignty, a Jewish state, and the rebirth of the Jewish people.